Why do you think it's important for people to learn about and be aware of McDonaldization? Not just students, but the public at large.
Because we haven't talked about the irrationality of rationality, which is the other and maybe the most important argument in the book. But basically, following Weber, I see McDonaldization as a highly irrational process, and that rationality is paradoxically producing a whole series of irrationalities. So it's dehumanizing. It produces environments in which it is, for example, dehumanizing to eat. Or more concretely, it produces a system which is extremely destructive on the environment, and perhaps most importantly, I hesitate to say most importantly, is extremely destructive on people's health. I mean, here are foods which are being marketed to an American population which is obese, has high cholesterol, has high blood pressure, in large part because of the fast food industry and the kinds of foods that it serves. And they are luring people in to eat more of this kind of stuff. And most damningly, I think they're luring in 2-year-old children through cartoon shows. And they're hooking them, and it's almost a drug pusher analogy here. They're hooking them on salty food and too much sugar and too much fat and too much cholesterol. I don't think I'm putting it too strongly to say that they're dooming them to an adulthood in which they are going to suffer the adverse health consequences of the McDonaldization, at least as it applies to food. So the other thing about being concerned, and this is another direction we haven't taken yet, is that McDonaldization is not just something that affects food or restaurants. There is a McDonaldization of the university. There's a McDonaldization of the church. There's a McDonaldization of the police force, the military. There have been a number of studies, and that's one of the most gratifying things I think about the book, is that it's led to a number of studies and essays on the McDonaldization of, and you fill in the blanks there. So this is a process that is proliferating. I just got an email the day before yesterday from a minister in Glen Burnie who said he had read some of my articles and he wanted to know more about the McDonaldization of the church that he was involved in. And so this is a process that is broadly occurring, not just in the United States, but throughout the world, and I think people should concern themselves with it.
Do you think that McDonaldization has been slowed or sped up or otherwise affected by your work?
Not really. You know, the way I put it is the number of books of McDonaldization that are sold is minuscule in comparison to the number of Big Macs that are sold. The influence of a book like this compared to McDonald's commercials, and I'm not even talking about Taco Bell or Pizza Hut or all the other entities, is infinitesimal. So, you know, I think that there have been people who have been changed in one way or another by their reading of the book, and maybe they raise their children differently. Somebody just did a documentary on pregnancy, and I had written about the McDonaldization of the process of giving birth, and they told me that they had read my book as an undergraduate, and it affected this documentary they've written, which is critical of the McDonaldization of childbirth. So, I mean, the effects are there, but as I say, I think they are infinitesimal in comparison to the impact of the system itself.
On a personal note, how has the rest of your work and your career been affected by the success of McDonaldization?
Well, I mean, it accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, which was that up to that time I had written a whole series of abstract, meta-theoretical books that had sold very few copies, and only my mother, I think, actually bought copies of those books. And I wanted to write a different kind of book that people actually read. And I think the success of that book allowed me to write then a string of other books, a book called Expressing America, a critique of the Global Credit Card Society in 1995, an issue that I don't think gets enough attention. I really think that the impact of the credit card on society is a highly pernicious one, and I think more attention needs to be devoted to that. Then in 1999, I wrote a book called Enchanting a Disenchanted World, Revolutionizing the Means of Consumption, which also uses Weberian theory. All my books start with a theoretical framework to look at shopping malls and Vegas casinos and Disney World, and to look at the way in which they take their kind of rationalized, McDonaldized structure and try to conceal it in a kind of enchanted, falsely enchanted kind of environment. I mean, the Las Vegas casino or Disney World being classic examples of that. And that, in fact, is what, in other terms, I think what Starbucks is trying to do, trying to enchant this highly rationalized, McDonaldized kind of structure. And then the most recent book is The Globalization of Nothing, which came out in its first edition in 2004. And that really, I think, is a kind of a summary of all the other books that I had done of this genre. My work has now moved much more explicitly in the direction of globalization. I have a number of projects in the works on globalization. One of the interesting things about McDonaldization is that the book originally, I didn't, although I defined it so that it could encompass the world, I didn't necessarily see it as part of the process of globalization, in part because in the early 1990s, globalization was not, there was hardly a term at that point. There wasn't the academic interest. It was really just beginning then. And so over the years, I've begun to see, and others have begun to see, much more of an association between my work and globalization. And so that's come to occupy more and more of my attention in recent years.